another hotel, so we'll just hold off for a couple of minutes. And everybody's tired already, so I'm sure a few people have slept in.
Get them to run around the room.
Yeah, jump up.
We'll watch. What does the bio in here say about you?
The same. I copied it.
Oh, this is exactly the same.
It's all exactly the same, except I added in a bit borderlines. Oh, I added in founding member interest by the welfare.
Oh, okay.
So it's almost exactly the same.
Val, did you come in a bus? Was there another bus, Dale, that you came in? Did you come in a bus just then? Oh, okay, so we might... I think that might have been it. So we'll start. The first thing I'd like to remind people of the exits in case of fire and earthquake. Either up the front here and down the steps and out the back of the building, or where you came in. At 11 o'clock there should be a test of alarms, so it's just a test. So don't run and panic. It should be fine. I hope.
The last time they had a test, they had an earthquake.
Last time they had a test, yeah, well, Kim reminded me the last time they had a test, they had an earthquake. So it might be best to go outside anyway. There's a few changes to the program. I remind people about the moderators. If you see a moderator missing, please just put your hand up and moderate if you could. Also, in the panel sessions, there are sheets going around asking you that if you're interested in continuing conversation, please put your name and email address. If at the end of the session you're in possession of that sheet, please pass on to myself or to Anna Christina or the member of staff that is handling either the microphones or ushering you in through the doors. So that's about it, I think, on my part. Moderating panels, other than the fact, a couple of announcements. In regards to a couple of people having problems with altitude, feeling dizzy or breathless. Stephen Wise did yesterday and he had to leave Mexico, so unfortunately we'll won't see Stephen around, but he will be giving his invited talk on Coody, or the local version of Skype, so that is still scheduled in the program. Marita Candela is unfortunately unable to attend due to illness, plenary speaker, but again on Coody. And Donna Haraway unfortunately can't make it. She's very ill with the flu, and we have somebody else that will be taking her place, and that will be announced shortly. So with those changes and a few changes on the panels, it should be well and truly fixed, we hope. So I'm going to pass over to Kim Stallwood, who's going to introduce our plenary speaker for this morning, Carol McKenna. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and it's my great honour to introduce to you Carol McKenna. Carol McKenna is Special Advisor to Philip Limbury, Chief Executive of Compassion in World Farming. Carol has worked with animal protection organisations in campaigning roles for more than 30 years. Previous positions include Director of Campaigns at Compassion in World Farming and Director of Programmes at the World Society for the Protection of Animals, which is now the World Animal Protection. Carol is a trustee of Eating Better, a broad alliance of UK non-governmental organisations, and a founding member and trustee of the Wild Animal Welfare Committee. In her role as Philip Limbury's advisor, Carol leads key projects, including, for example, the recent Extinction and Livestock Conference in last October, which I was very pleased to attend because it was very informative and groundbreaking. And I also want to point out that in this book, which you won't be able to see the cover, but you can see the book is called The Meat Crisis, Developing More Sustainable and Ethical Production and Consumption, second edition, edited by Joyce De Silva and John Webster, published by Earthscan, which is a very prestigious publisher. Carol has a chapter which is called The Impact of Legislation and Industry Standards on Farm Animal Welfare. That very brief introduction covers a lot of what Carol's work is over many years, and it's a great pleasure to introduce you to her. She'll make a presentation, and then there will be questions and answers after that. Carol McKenna, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here so early. I know that many of us are still struggling with our body clocks, so thank you. It's great to be here. It's good that we're awake, and I'm really looking forward to the presentation and then the discussion that we'll have afterwards, hopefully. So thank you. I have a son. His name's Hugo. He's 21 years old. He's in his final year at university. He has a passion for music, and like many young people, he spends his spare time DJing, and he's actually very good at it. Like all parents, I hope that my child will have a good future. When he was born, my husband and I planted a tree with a plaque, expressing our wish that Hugo would have a long life full of joy, laughter, and happiness. As the years have gone by, though, I feared more and more for his future, indeed for all of our futures. A few years ago, I read a book, 10 Billion, which was written by a leading scientist, Stephen Emmett. And this book brought all of my concerns to a head. 10 Billion outlines all of the harms that human progress has caused to our planet. You may have read it too. Human need for food, our demands for energy and transport, our desires for ever more and more stuff. All of these have led to fundamental transformation of Earth's survival systems. We've damaged the biosphere, the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the cryosphere, the very life systems of our planet. We've changed our climate. We're running out of water. What will happen when we reach 10 billion people? We're already using nearly half the world's usable land for agriculture. Wildlife is disappearing 1,000 times faster than would be expected. How much habitat will be left for the animals with whom we share the planet? Just one example. There are 20,000 African lions left and 500 Asiatic lions. 50 years ago, there were 450,000 lions. Studies show that every time the human population increases by 1 billion, the lion population halves. We're facing not only a world without lions and tigers and elephants, but also a world without bees, worms, and butterflies. By the end of the century, if population were to continue to increase at the same rate, we would be at 28 billion people instead of the projected 10 or 11. What would be left of the planet then for our children's children, for animals and birds? How does one find hope when faced with a planetary emergency on this scale? For my part, after fighting depression and considering whether a secure future for my son would be retreat to an armed small holding, I found my hope with recognition that transformation of our food and farming systems is the way forward. Working with Philip Limbury on his book projects, Farmageddon, The True Cost of Cheap Meat, and Dead Zone, Where the Wild Things Were, we've discovered more and more about how food and farming are at the heart of many of the problems facing our planet. And we need to remember we just have one planet and it doesn't have an umbilical cord. Dead Zone and our recent Extinction and Livestock Conference held in London last October focus on how food production is driving wildlife to extinction. In fact, food is responsible for 2/3 of wildlife loss, and this is what is driving the Great Disappearing Act. I want to share with you today some of the stories Philip and Compassion unearthed whilst investigating for Dead Zone, which was the second global investigation that we'd conducted into the food industry. And I'd like to start in the jungles of Sumatra. And Maya, I'd be grateful if you could play the first video.
In the dam in northern Sumatra, on the trail of Sumatra's last remaining elephants. Elephants are always on the move. They need a large, continuous, connected forest habitat to feed and support them. What they are finding increasingly is that they have isolated patches of forest surrounded by industrial palm plantations. It's just not enough to sustain them.
They can't live in palm plantation. They need forest. Forest is their home. Plantation is not their home. They need forest to eat, to breed. They cannot eat palm trees.
So what I've discovered is that part of the reason why this forest is gone is because factory farmed animals, caged, crammed and confined in Europe, are being fed on the palm kernel. As the forest shrinks, there are more and more troublesome elephants. That's how the locals see them, getting out into the farmland. And if they can't be got back into the forest, some are poisoned or shot, others are captured, taken to what they call the training centre and enlisted in the patrols to help keep the wild elephants where they should be, in the wild. Some captured elephants are kept in tourist resorts and eco-centres, but this does nothing to support the wider population of elephants, whose numbers in the wild are rapidly declining, just so we can continue to feed our appetite for palm and for cheap meat and dairy.
Well, I think the future of the Sumatran elephant is really quite bleak right now. It needs large areas of lowland forest. Simple as that. They move long distances, they have long migration routes, and currently, even if not all of their habitat is being taken, if their travel routes are cut, they will come into conflict with people, and always, inevitably, the wildlife loses in the end.
Ending factory farming will help take the pressure off hard-pressed forests and give iconic wildlife, like the Sumatran elephant, the chance of a future.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to tell you about another of the stories in Dead Zone, a story that's closer to us here in Mexico. Half the world's jaguars are in Brazil. They're down to their last 15,000 on the planet. In Dead Zone, Philip writes how he travelled to Brazil. I'm just going to play this in the background. One of the most biodiverse regions on the planet. He didn't get to see a jaguar in the wild, but he learned about their plight. He flew over the vast areas of endless rainforest from São Felix, a place the locals call the ends of the earth. He saw the mighty Aragua River wriggling away like a giant serpent, and watched as things started to change. The rainforest started to show bare patches, just small ones at first, then bigger, and then great chunks, until all of a sudden the rainforest was gone. It was just an island in a vast sea of crops. Some of you may also have flown over the rainforest or visited Brazil and seen the devastation there, the endless crops of soya that have replaced the forests. The forests that are the lungs of the earth have been replaced by massive combine harvesters sweeping across the landscape. The consequence for the jaguar, 95% gone in the last 50 years. And what's all the soil for? Is it to feed vegetarians and vegans? No, it's to feed factory-farmed animals, many of them in Europe. But this story isn't one that just affects animals. It's also affecting people. And Maya, if you could show the second video, please.
Brazil is going through an explosive growth in agriculture. And much of this new farmland is making way for the industrial production of things like sugar, beef and soya. Deforestation has had a devastating effect on both indigenous wildlife and indigenous people. The main reason why we've come here is because although Brazil has got so much land, it's a vast country. Land is the source of many disputes here. And the tribe that I've come here to see are just one of those that have been squeezed off of their land by agriculture, by industrial farming and cattle ranching.
Onça não tem mais, só capim. Nem pássaro não tem, nem macaco não tem. Então, a natureza foi de afastado e o bicho some tudo.
Uma situação que ainda é bastante crítica. Esse aqui é o mapa da reserva de Maracete. E no entorno aqui você tem grandes fazendas de soja, de milho, de algodão, em que os rios levam para dentro das terras indígenas ou na divisa, que são os rios mais caudalosos e que tinha antigamente muito peixe e que hoje não tem peixe mais.
But it's not just wildlife that are directly affected. The heavy use of pesticides on soya is causing a human health crisis as well.
Desde 2008, o Brasil é o país que mais consome agrotóxicos no mundo. Só o Brasil consome 20% de todo agrotóxico consumido no mundo. Para se ter uma ideia, de acordo com dados oficiais, desde 1990 nós tivemos mais de 90 mil pessoas intoxicadas com agrotóxicos no Brasil.
Meat, milk and eggs have never been cheaper, but that cheap food comes with a higher, hidden price tag. The soya being grown in Brazil, largely for animal feed, has devastating consequences for people, for animals, for ecosystems, and for our climate.
And it's not just wildlife on land that's suffering. I'd like to talk about what we've discovered about the oceans. Philip was in South Africa in 2014, touring to promote his book Farmageddon, and he squeezed in a trip to Boulders Beach along the Cape Peninsula, where a colony of African penguins had actually set up home near to some residential houses. It's one of the easiest ways to see penguins in the wild. They attract about 60,000 visitors a year, and there's a visitor centre that sells all kinds of penguin memorabilia. But what struck Philip was a display board listing the threats to the species, which included reduction of penguin food supply by commercial fishing, pilchards, anchovy. That bland phrase, reduction of penguin food supply, means penguins are being starved to extinction. And why? Were the villains offshore and out of sight, hoovering up the fish they depend upon to feed factory farms? Anchovies, pilchards, red-eyes, small fish, so-called trash fish, are being taken from the ocean in great quantities to be turned into fish meal to feed animals on factory farms. And this is happening in the oceans all around the world. Marine wildlife in Peru is being devastated by the fish meal industry, and Europe's puffins are now globally endangered, partly because of removal from the seas of the fish on which they depend. This great disappearing act of wildlife is happening all around the world, even on our own doorsteps. I live in a small village in the English countryside. My husband and I moved there because of our love of nature and the environment, and we wanted to live where we were surrounded by it. But in our lifetimes, we've seen nature losses on an absolutely unprecedented scale in the UK. We've lost 44 million birds. That's the breeding pair every minute. Turtle doves, skylarks, barn owls, and other once common farmland birds have gone into steep decline. The numbers of bees in the UK has halved in the last 25 years. In fact, worldwide, in the last 40 years, since the widespread adoption of factory farming, the total number of wild mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish has halved. That's a shocking statistic. Not too far from our conference venue is the site of another of the Dead Zone stories that we hope will help to change attitudes to food and farming around the world. Around 50 million bison once roamed the Great Plains of the Midwest of America in vast herds. If we scooped them all up at once and weighed them, they would have weighed the same as the entire human population of North America today. And they were powered by nothing more than sunshine, rain, and grass. And then they were wiped out. Now they're replaced by millions of cattle, many in feedlots, the pasture ploughed up for monocultures of chemical-soaked crops like corn. That corn is grown using enormous amounts of fertilizer made in chemical plants the size of industrial estates. Much of the fertilizer washes into the waterways and down the Mississippi, where it ends up in the Gulf of Mexico. And there it causes one of the world's largest marine dead zones, an area of polluted sea as big as a country the size of Wales, where nothing lives. There are already hundreds of marine dead zones around the world, with the number doubling every decade. And what's all the corn grown for? Is it to feed the world? No. Most of it's destined to feed cattle and cars. It's almost as if the food system has been hijacked by the animal feed industry, which, like a giant machine, is sweeping the landscape. Vast acreages of land are now devoted to growing crops for industrial reared animals. If we put all of those feed crops worldwide into one field, that field would cover an area equivalent to the entire land surface of the European Union. Put it another way, if we restored farm animals to the land, on pasture, and used that arable land to feed people, that crop would feed an extra 4 billion. Yet factory farmers have us believe that wasting enough food for more than half the humans on the planet is somehow efficient or a necessary evil. Perhaps most importantly of all, our soils are disappearing too. I know Rod mentioned this at the opening of the conference. Not least because of the pounding they take from industrial agriculture. So much so that the UN warns that at the current rate of disappearance, we could have just 60 years of harvest left. And in the UK, we're told we have even less. We're told we have 40 harvests left. What hope for my son Hugo's future and that of his children if we don't change? Will we have to watch the demise of our soils, the demise of our food system as we know it? Wouldn't it be great then if instead we had a farming system that instead of causing all the cruelty, the waste, the inefficiency, actually started to put things back, that started to regenerate the soil naturally, that started to bring pollinating insects back, that didn't rely on copious antibiotics, that made wonderful homes for farm animals and for wild things too. If farming were regenerative, well, it can be, and here's just some of the many farmers Compassion has met who are doing just that. This is Tim May, he farms in my county where I live. Will Harris, who farms in the US, and Charlie Burrell, another farmer from the UK. Wouldn't it be so? They are actually restoring animals to their ecological niche as grazing animals, where they move around the farm in their rotation, building the soil naturally. The animals can run and jump and flap their wings or wallow in the mud, and in the case of pigs and poultry, be restored to their natural role as foragers and users of waste. Without the chemicals, wildflowers start coming back, along with the seeds and the insects, and with them the birds and the bees, the bats. And what's really special about all of this is it takes the pressure off the hard-pressed forests, so they can do the underrated things that they do, like storing carbon out of the atmosphere and giving us oxygen to breathe. It's a great reappearing act, and one that we can all help bring about. At our Extinction and Livestock Conference, Compassion launched its new strategic plan and also our big idea that's going to guide our work for the next 10 years. It's the way that we believe we can safeguard the future. We believe that we need to achieve some kind of global agreement to replace factory farming, something akin to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. To do that, we need to mobilise governments, corporates and civil society. We need your help. We want to bring about a new zeitgeist in favour of a fusion between food, farming and nature. We're all at this conference because of our passions and our interests. There are so many different aspects of minding animals, and I've met so many interesting people here studying so many different things. I joined Compassion Worth Farming in the mid-1980s because of my passion for animals and for animal welfare. But over the years, I came to realise that this is more than a campaign for animal welfare. It's a campaign to solve an existential issue. Life on Earth really does depend on our transforming food and farming systems. So I'm appealing to everyone, whatever your interest, whatever your particular passion, to become involved in the campaign to end factory farming and to support global action to transform our food systems into sustainable ones that are fit not only for animals but also for people and for the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, very much for that very thoughtful and provocative presentation. We now have until 9:30 a period of questions and answers. I'm sure there's probably plenty of time for everyone to ask a question, but I'm going to ask that we invite questions from women first. I did check with Carol earlier, and she said that she was agreeable with me doing this. So I'm going to open the floor to questions. Are there microphones around? If not, oh yes, there are. Microphones? Yes, we do have microphones. So if you could please indicate if you'd like to ask a question. Now don't be shy. Okay, well what I'll do is I'm going to kick off a question with Carol. And what can you share with us about, given it's a very depressing picture, and that's an understatement. What can you share with us that gives you hope and gives you encouragement that we can actually pull ourselves out of this situation that you described so well?
Thank you, Kim. Yes, there are signs of hope. I mean, Compassion and Worth Farming, we campaign on both sides of the sort of, we campaign for policy change and legislation, and we also campaign for corporate change. We've found in recent years that the fast route to change is by working with food businesses. We work with over 800 food businesses globally, and food businesses are actually putting changes into effect. So, for example, on cage-free eggs, McDonald's made a commitment in 2015 to shift to cage-free eggs in the USA. And within a few months afterwards, another 130 companies had actually followed suit. Other companies are taking action to reduce the amount of meat in their supply chain. So as Eating Better, we track what companies are doing. One of the UK's leading retailers, Asda, for example, has introduced a sort of a new range of healthy mints, which is 70% beef and 30% haricot beans. So we're actually talking to food companies at the moment about actually, how could they replace meat in their supply, encourage people to eat more plants. One of the really interesting meetings I went to last week was people sharing what they're doing with food business to actually reduce meat in the supply chain. There was a discussion about using language to improve, to encourage consumers to purchase more meat-free dishes. And the Better Buying Lab had renamed a supermarket's meat-free sausages and mash to Cumberland Spice sausages and mash, and that increased sales by between 50 and 70%. So I think there are a lot of things doing. There's not one magic bullet. This is a really complex problem. It has to be tackled from so many directions. We need action in different countries at all levels. But I think some food businesses are leading the way, and they are doing some very exciting things. And then, of course, some governments are starting to take action too. But really, I think at the heart of it, there is action. So I do have hope, because I do see signs of progress.
Good, thank you. Okay, questions from the floor?
Carol, thank you very much for your lecture. I think it's amazing. Congratulations. And I think that, as you have said, the problem is the enormous corporations, so powerful, that we need a politics, law to limit the problem that they are making. For instance, here in Mexico, I'm Mexican, I am a teacher. The question I wanted to ask is, for my students, I want to sensibilize them with the documentary and the material you have. Is it possible to have it? Is it available in internet or something? Because I would love them to read and to see what you have presented.
Yes. No, you're so right. We do need to raise awareness everywhere, and that's part of the strategy behind the books, for example. So Philip's first book, Farmageddon, The True Cost of Meat, is available now in 7 languages. There's an illustrated version, which would be very good for young people, and I'm really happy to tell you that's available in Spanish. I will, if you give me your card afterwards, I'll send a link, and this book would make a fantastic resource. And yes, it is in Spanish. We also do have an educational department. We have some educational resources, and so I'd be happy if anyone gives me their card to share details.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for a very informative and moving presentation. My question is a simple one on some levels. What should we eat? I can go to bed thinking I should be an absolute vegan, and the next day wake up thinking it would be much better for me to support the local farmer who's trying to restore the soils. It would be much better for me to eat his chicken and eat his pork and buy eggs from him because of what he's doing for the environment. I'm in the position where I can afford his products, and if no one buys from him, he won't be able to continue doing that. So I know you can't answer the question of what everyone should eat, but what are your thoughts on this?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So my thoughts on it are that as Compassion and also as the Eating Better Alliance, what we say to people, if you are going to choose meat, then please choose meat that's from pasture-fed, or free-range, or organic. So avoid the intensively farmed avoid the cheap meat, the intensively farmed meat, choose the pasture-fed, free-range or organic. And we also ask people to have some meat-free days and eat more plants. The consequence of eating more pasture-fed, free-range and organic meat will probably mean eating more meat from ruminants and less from monogastrics, so that is a consequence. And in terms of climate change, I think the message is clear: we all need to just eat less meat. I hope that helps somewhat, yes. The Eating Better Alliance is actually working on a briefing at the moment about what eating better means, and we work across that's an alliance of health organisations as well as environmental and animal welfare organisations. So I'd be happy again to share that briefing with you when it's published. It's in draft form at the moment.
I think, Carol, what would be really useful at this point in time is just to say something about the history of the organisation and who founded the organisation and why they established it the way that they did.
Yes, absolutely. So Compassion World Farming was actually 50 years old last year. It was founded in 1967, and it was actually founded by a dairy farmer, Peter Roberts, and his wife Anna. They were farming in the south of England, and they became increasingly concerned about the rise of factory farming around them. And they were actually advised by the British Ministry of Agriculture to set up an intensive broiler farming system. And they said no, they didn't want to do that. If that was the only way to farm, then they weren't going to farm. And so they actually, at that time, they went to see all of the larger animal welfare organisations, such as the RSPCA, and asked whether they would campaign and take up the issue of farm animals. But the other organisations were very busy on companion animal subjects, so Compassion World Farming was founded. And it's heartening, just the history. I know one of the first campaigns was Project 70, and Peter Roberts aimed to ban the battery cage, the veal crate and the sow stall by 1970. So when it got to our 50th anniversary, we didn't celebrate because factory farming had grown and so many more billions of farm animals were being farmed, but we did use it as the opportunity to launch the call for a global agreement on farming. Just picking up on your question about meat, in terms of what Compassion World Farming offers when it has events, ever since our first event in 1967, we've never served meat. We've only ever offered vegetarian or plant-based meals to people, as a way of actually showing people that there are alternatives.
Another question from the floor.
Good morning. My name is Nikisha. First, I want to say thank you for the resources. It's, but then there's always something newer to know, and I could think of several people that I'm like, I need to send these videos to, so thank you. The question, I guess, comes out of the feeling that this is so dire. I'm wondering about the suggestion for pasture-raised as a substitute, because it seems to me, I don't know very much about land things, and I suck at math, but it seems to me that it would actually take more earth space for people who want to continue eating meat, even at a reduced level, that we would take more terra raising pasture-raised animals for food. So I guess I'm not sure. I wonder if you can say more about how you see that calculus. And I also wonder about veganic agriculture and if that's something that you're tending to, so that there is a way of restoring the soil, et cetera, and leaving eating animals out of it, and whether that's something that this organization is supporting or speaking to. It's so dire, and I'm not sure that this is enough. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
Okay. I think with respect to the use of pasture for animals, I mean, really what that would be doing is ideally using land on which we could not grow human edible crops. So what we're saying is that's the land on which the animals would be kept, who can convert grass, things that we can't eat. Whereas at the moment in the factory farmed animals, they're feeding cereals. A third of the world's cereals are fed by the animals that are caged and confined, and almost all the world's soya, and that takes a vast amount of land to grow. So that's really how we're seeing that calculus. In terms of being able to care for the soil without animals, then yes, I know that is possible, and it's not something that I know a great deal about. It is something that Peter Roberts wrote about, sort of looking towards a time when perhaps animals weren't needed on the land, but I'm sorry, it's not my area of expertise. But I hope that it does seem as if it's a space-saving idea that the animals are confined in factory farms, but it actually isn't, because acres and acres and acres of land are used to grow food to feed them, and they're eating food that humans could eat.
Another question from the floor? Yes, Rainer. Do you have a microphone? Please wait for the microphone.
Thank you, Carol, for this very strong presentation. And I attended your conference in London last year on livestock and extinction, and the very unique thing of this conference was that the environmental and the animal advocacy world and policymakers got together, because that zone and your strategy on ending factory farming is building these bridges between the environmentalists, between animal advocates and others who are committed to saving the planet. And you were referring in your presentation to working towards a global convention to end factory farming. And can you elaborate a bit on that? How do you see that evolving over the coming years, and how could the participants in this room contribute to that process?
Great, thank you, Reineke. Yes, the strategy behind the conference was very much to reach out to the conservation movement, because we really, if we're going to end factory farming, we need to be working together, the animal welfare movement, environmental movement, conservation movement, people working on health. So Compassion very much sees its role as building bridges and connections and coalitions. In terms of the campaign for the global agreement, we're going to be lobbying at the UN and also governments. We want to build a coalition in order to do that, so we want to work in partnership. We're aiming to organise a series of round tables in different parts of the world, and we're inviting people at the moment to join a mailing list so that we can contact them and then involve them in the discussions and in the round tables. And we're having discussions, we're starting discussions with different organisations. It's going to be a major campaign. It's not going to be something that's easy. It's going to take the next 10 years to get it going, but it's something that we believe is absolutely vital if we're going to get action on the scale that's needed to solve this problem. I should also add that as an organisation, we've just launched our new strategic plan. So again, this is available on our website, 2018 to 2022. This sets out how the organisation's resources, time, energy will be spent over the next 5 years, but it's setting the direction for the next 10. And at the heart of this strategy is the campaign for that global agreement. If you're interested in becoming part of that and participating, please do get in touch with us or email me, and then we can keep you up to date with it. And we look forward to working with Eurogroup for Animals on it.
Okay, let's open up to the whole floor for questions from anyone. I saw a gentleman over there.
Thank you. Stephen Blakeway. Responding partly to the comment of the lady on the front there, there was a talk yesterday about silvopastoralism in Mexico as an alternative production system for you know, for this part of the world. And again, it's not grass. It's sort of keeping cattle under trees and bushes and mixed in with that. And I know pigs often do that. But there are large parts of the world where people are still doing indigenous farming practices with animals. Pastoralism in Africa is a fantastically sort of sensitive system of production in very fragile areas. And you know, in the mountains of Afghanistan, again, transhuman sheep grazing in places where doing anything else would be wouldn't really work in terms of keeping those populations survive. So, and what I've spoken to colleagues in Sudan who say, well, how could we possibly market what we do in this global economy? And yet they are doing all the things that you're suggesting that people could be. You know, if this is going to be meat production, they're doing it, and they've always been doing it. So how does compassion world farming and the sort of, you know, the white Western drivers of this anti meat production because of factory farming, which is, you know, is a product of what we've been doing, how do we respond to that? Because I really care about both sides of all this, and it'd be nice to have a sort of a joined up approach.
Yes, thank you so much, Stephen. Yes, we're very excited about silvopastoralism. And I've seen the talks, we've looked at that, it's one of the examples that we quote. We actually have case studies which are online of the kinds of farming systems that we believe should be supported over the industrial systems, and that's definitely one of them. And I have with me our vision for fair food and farming that we launched at the UN. And one of the parts of this is that we want to support small-scale farmers in the developing world. They should be helped to improve the health and nutrition of the animals, thereby increasing their productivity. Industrial livestock production should be avoided as it outcompetes and undermines smallholder farmers. So, yes, have a great deal of support for your point of view there.
Any more questions from anyone? Yes.
Thanks for that presentation, Carol. That was really, really interesting and informative. And I would like to say, certainly from my perspective and my organisation's perspective, the work that Compassion have done, especially in the last number of years with Farmageddon and with Dead Zone, in bringing clearly to people's attention the link between deforestation, wildlife degradation, and factory farming, has been a big eye-opener to lots of people around the globe. The fact that people eating cheap meat in London or Manchester, where it's coming from and what that feed is coming from, it has been unknown to people. And clearly, the work that Compassion are doing in bringing that message to will have an effect. So, going back to what Kim said and yourself said, it is a depressing world we live in, but there is always hope. And the work that everybody in this room does is that hope, frankly. I just wanted to make one sort of comment, really, and question is that, as Reineke said, we actually need to work across all the areas of people here, activists, academics, NGOs, whoever they happen to be, working as a worldwide organisation and lobbying in our different ways and different capacities for the same end. And I just wanted to make a plea not to forget the faiths in that, that also, apart from influencing government, apart from influencing corporates, producers, we want to influence consumers, which is what you're doing, and they're individuals. And lots of them are faith-based people. If we can get the faiths to influence their people, it's not easy to do, I've done from my own perspective, then that can make a huge difference in influencing individual behaviour. So I just wanted your view on that.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, I think it's incredibly important, and it is something that Compassion and World Farming does endeavour to work with the faiths. Way back in, 1986, I believe, we worked with an imam to produce. We funded the production of a book, Animal Welfare in Islam. which has since been reprinted by the British Islamic Council, and that was about humane attitude, Islamic attitudes towards animals. So I agree with you, it's very important that we work with the faiths, and I know we're very friendly with your organisation. So.
Now we have 5 minutes left, so we only have time for one quick question and one quick answer.
Yes, thanks, Carol. I also really found your presentation moving, and I'm over here if you're
there, thank you.
So, yeah, I'm invisible. So, I think the situation's very dire. CO2 concentrations have exceeded 400 parts per million. They're going to exceed the 450 part per million cap by 2060. Many people think that number is too generous. It should have been capped at 350. So, you know, reaching a 4-degree increase centigrade climate is almost inevitable. Currently, factory farming technology is being exported to parts of the world that don't have it.
Mylan, please put it as a question.
There's a question. But I actually think there's a serious urgency. You say you're going to try to work with environmental groups. If Cowspiracy is at all right, the environmental groups won't touch this issue. So, you know, really, what can be done to bring the factory farming industry to its knees? You know, in answer to how much animal products should we be eating, it's absolutely none. Locally produced cows fart. Methane is a huge problem with much greater global warming potential. So, you know, I mean, I don't think we should be advocating, oh, yes, let's pat our little local happy farmer on the back. Cage-free chickens use as much food as caged ones. So I'm just curious what you would have to say because of...
Okay, what we've done in our new strategy is we've actually set ourselves a campaign target, and we want to see meat consumption and production of animals for meat reduced by half by 2035 in high-consuming countries, but globally by 2050. And we've set the baseline measurement for that as 2015 figures. We're taking the issue of meat production very seriously, and our food business department is going to be extending its work from improving animal welfare that it's been doing with companies to actually talking to them about how we reduce the amount of meat in the supply chain and how we actually take animals out of the supply chain. Yes, and we'll be asking other organisations to do that.
Carol, thank you very much for an excellent presentation and for answering the questions so well. And please join us in thank you. Thank you. Now you're here through...